I am Jeff Foxworthy, and welcome to Gamekeeper Podcast. If you want to learn more about farming for wildlife and habitat management, then, buddy, you are in the right place. Join the Gamekeeper crew direct from Mossy Oak Land Enhancement Studio as they discuss the latest wildlife and habitat management practices, news, and, of course, hunting. There's no telling what you'll learn, but I'm going to tell you, I bet it's interesting. Enjoy.
We're live in 3, 2, 1.
All right, everybody, welcome to West Point, Mississippi, to our humble podcast studio here.
Humble.
We've got a full house.
Yeah, we do.
It's been a while. You know, I hadn't seen any of you guys since last year.
I know. He's been in hiding in an undisclosed location in Alabama. Whoops, I said Alabama. Sorry.
Well, it's a big state, though, you know. Big state, but there's it looks like his guide service has
Mark
been
that
really
time
good.
code, Richie.
His guide service has been pretty
I'm
effective.
telling you, he's a hell of a deer guide.
Evidently. So we're not going to get a lot of comment about that
No.
as we move on. But, yeah, it is the new year, guys. We're so happy to still be here.
Yeah.
I keep thinking at any point.
In the middle of, I guess a little bit off of peak rut is white deer season's wide open.
You know what? I kind of feel for we watch our friends in the Midwest and they get started with the rut early and they're having so much fun and we're down here and it's not happening. And so now it's happening for us, or it's beginning to tail off.
Now
they're hunting that late season, the ones that still can hunt. So it's pretty tough up there.
Yeah, they're going crazy around here. We had like a 10-point running around Zuber Park in West Point the other day. Somebody filmed it.
Oh, did
Which
we?
is,
I
on
missed that
the
one.
highway, the main thoroughfare.
Yeah, half a mile from here.
The Walmart people were telling me about one coming out in the parking lot at night chasing does and before Christmas, but
In the parking lot?
probably the same one.
Yeah, probably so.
Truck drivers are, parking and coming inside and telling them about it.
How about that? Well, so look, you can hear some people snickering. We've got a couple of guests sitting on the couch. I'm going to introduce Caroline Winters. And she is a young lady, went to Mississippi State.
That's where she got all the wisdom.
That's
Look
right.
at a big smile, but she has killed a giant deer
I'm looking at it.
that we're going to hear the story of. It's a legitimate 190. She's got shed. She and her father and
Quit
her, and
putting
her
numbers
husband.
on it. It's a glorious animal.
Well, it's just a good way to everybody visualize how big it is.
And 1 year ago today, her mom was in here podcasting with us about archaeology.
wow,
one
that's
year ago
ironic.
today?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, this is our 200th podcast.
We've
So
done
that-
this 200 times.
We've done this 200 times.
You couldn't even spell podcast
No,
before this.
I can't.
He didn't know what one was.
Who in the world said he could now?
Oh, what?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Look. So let's look at the other end of the couch. We've got William McKinley, and William, we've known you for a while,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure I know your title though. You're with the Mississippi Department of
Wildlife, Fisheries, and
Parks.
That's right. I'm the Deer Program Coordinator.
So you're the guy that's got all the answers to all the problems anybody has when they about deer around the state.
No, he's the one that listens to all the problems. Unfortunately,
I like what he said. Yes, I look at it from a statewide whole, and we try to look at deer season, look at the overall herd health, and I got over 1.5 million critters running around out there, so
That's a lot.
it gets kind of busy.
It seems like this year there's just been bigger deer hitting the ground in the state of Mississippi. Are you hearing that too?
Absolutely, it has been a really good year for big antlers like the deer that Caroline has harvested here. That's a super animal, but you look beside that and there's a shed laying there from that deer that she brought with her, and so many deer these days because of the type of management we're doing. And I got a whole list of stuff here on historical management that we'll get to whenever y'all want to talk about that, but of how management has changed in the deer arena over the past few decades. So but a lot of people are letting really good deer go because they're not quite at their peak yet. That deer that wouldn't have been let go a few years ago, or especially a decade ago.
oh, there are not many people that will let that deer go
Oh, no.
around the state. I'd say that you're in the 1% group. But if they could see what we're looking at now,
Yeah, the difference between
oh
those.
my goodness.
Yeah.
The results.
Yeah.
That is blowing up.
Well, why don't we start with Caroline and her story? So she's got a big smile on her face. I'm just excited. Tell us a little bit about you first, and how all this came to be.
Well, I'm from Lambert, Mississippi.
The metropolis.
Yeah, my dad, ever since I could go to the woods, he got me out and took me to the woods. And I grew up a farm kid, grew up on a farm, and very lucky and very blessed that we have land that we can grow deer like this. And I went to Mississippi State. I wanted to be a vet, like every kid that loves animals wants to be. And I found out about the wildlife, fisheries, and aquaculture major, and I was like, okay, no, that's what I want to do. Because I always was kind of like, oh man, I wish I could just hunt for a living. That would be cool. Doesn't everybody want to do that?
That's what we're trying to do.
That's what I tried to do, and it didn't work out.
But I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to figure out how to conserve and manage these animals to get animals like this.
Oh, it's just an incredible looking at that. I want to hear the story about. You've got these sheds. How long of a relationship have you guys had with this deer?
Oh, I could tear up talking about it.
What? First off,
That's awesome.
What'd you decide to name this deer?
We named him from the time we saw him as a 3.5-year-old. We called him TT for Tall 10.
Tall 10, TT.
We were tired of saying the Tall 10, the Tall 10. I was like, let's shorten it to TT.
Yeah.
And Rick was like, I like that. So, yeah, we called him TT because he, just a beautiful, perfectly symmetrical 10-point since we saw him 2 years ago. And, I'm very thankful that, we see deer like that a lot, 3.5-year-olds that we see and we're like, man, that is going to be a really good deer one day. We really have to let him walk and see, how big he gets. But usually, after we get through that, we let him walk, we never see him again. It's usually they disperse and go do things that bucks do. And, I can't remember if we had pictures of him in velvet, but, then last year we got pictures of him the year that he had that side.
That was last year?
Yes, that was last year.
And
yes,
you feel
sir.
like he was 4 then?
Yes. And I have the jawbone in the truck. I need to bring it in. Let William look at it.
That monstrosity laying there is only 5?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
I mean, you can't wait any longer, but just to know you've got the genetics running around that could be more than that.
That's right.
Absolutely.
And when they use the phrase "he blew up,"
That's
what he
this
did.
guy blew up.
Yeah. How many inches would you think he grew in between 4 and 5?
I don't know. I wish we would have measured him, just to see.
Lanny usually
but-
can look at
Like
him and tell.
40?
Get pretty close.
So
Yeah.
does your farm have a lot of soybeans on it? Or
Yes. Yeah. The property that this deer came from, my dad farms all soybeans.
That one that just died here that was so massive. And I was thinking with this drought, we were going to have such a big reduction in them. But I remembered that one has access to soybeans. One of the few places around here I knew that they could get to them. And there's no question what happens if you keep, not to get into his job, but I've noticed the deer that, people get great food for them and expect it to happen in year one, whether they're feeding them pellets or they got them on soybeans or, whatever great crop. And, that deer's had great nutrition his whole life.
Yeah.
The building blocks are built when they're younger. There's no one hit wonder to
And
grow
he
a deer
had a
like
healthy doe that he come from too.
that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So even before he was born, that generational
healthy.
effect was there. That you can't overlook that part. That you got to keep those does healthy so they have healthy fawns, which then turn into deer like this.
I can't tell you how many deer I've seen. And even here, between here and our place in Alabama and back and forth, that, and in places in between and stuff, that you see a deer that's just so different. And I ask the question every time, that deer's had access to soybeans. And I would say 80% of the time the answer is yes. In fact, some of them go, no. And then they go, wait, about 3/4 of a mile there is some. I said, well, they'll travel a lot further than that for summer nutrition. A long ways. I'd say 2 or 3 miles from my learning.
So
She'll
what
get to it.
what was his personality like? Did he? I mean, was he a more reclusive, or did you see him a lot? You know?
He was definitely a homebody for sure.
Good for him.
You know, we got pictures of him. You know, he daylighted a lot, and we got pictures of ever since we saw. I think we saw him before we got game camera pictures of him as a 3.5-year-old. But you know, he was a regular, always on the camera. And he, you know, I kind of had like an emotional attachment to him because I'd watched him so much and I'd seen him so much. And,
Wow.
you know, I think, you know, I mean, I was nervous the afternoon that I shot him, but during bow season, I had him in 60 yards. That at 60 yards.
Watching that.
I think that was more exhilarating than, you know, getting a shot at him. And, you know, it was just cool watching him because he was the first deer in the field and he was the last one to leave. And I watched him all afternoon long.
Did he shake his head a bunch? That always gets you going.
He would. You know, it was funny. He came out with a younger deer. I can't remember, a little 8 or 10 point, just a pretty young deer. And, you know, they were buddies. Like, they would spar and they would play and do whatever. And
For now.
That wasn't a fair fight. That was not a fair fight.
in the corner of the field, they were sparring. And I was just like, does this little deer not understand like what he's messing with? But, you know, Rick and I always like talked about how ever since, you know, he was like that, you know, you kind of knew him when he came into the field. He would just step to the edge of the field and he'd just put his head up and would just look around. And that's how I'm going to get him mounted, kind of a upright, just kind of like he was just looking over.
Yeah.
Sounds cheesy, but like so
No.
majestic.
No,
and he
yeah.
just,
Yeah.
like he's looking over his kingdom.
Yeah.
And he just,
That's what it was.
I
He
mean,
deserves it.
yeah, and you need to be able to reflect on that more than looking at photos the rest of your life
Absolutely.
because it's so special. Now, just point out, you know, for the gamekeeper mentality out there, how special that is to develop. And I know this sounds cheesy, but it's true. Developing a relationship with a wild animal. like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Something you didn't just go somewhere on a trip and they put you in a great stand. You know, you grew the deer yourself with your family. And not only that, you had all that time. I'll talk about time all the time. That's 2 words in
That
one.
was good.
Yeah, and you had got to spend all that time with him. It made it so much more special. So, yeah, I mean, how cool is that? I mean,
No, that's right.
how can anybody not be for what goes on in wildlife management and hunting when it ends up like this? And I realize there's bad eggs in every
Of course.
you know, pursuit, but this is as special as it gets.
No, I like that right off the bat. She said, "I'm gonna get teary-eyed talking about it."
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I bet you got.
Well, you love them that much.
And you
is what it
know,
is.
you can forget the score. Everybody out there doing this, hopefully, their deer would be a homebody too. Whatever it is, it could just be a beautiful 8-point or something. But how lucky are y'all that he didn't roam and get himself shot somewhere else?
Exactly.
You know.
Did your neighbors have pictures of him after it was over? They come forth and
I don't specifically know for sure, but I do think one of the neighbors had seen him. And you know, the neighbor actually found the shed that has the messed up pedicle from last year. One of our neighbors found it in a bean field, like right off the road, not far from where he lived, but right off a road. Found that shed this past spring.
Yeah,
And
that's
that had to disturb you. I mean, looking at that pedicle like
Yeah,
that.
well, and we were disturbed when, you know, last year we kind of had a long deer season. We didn't really have many good deer on camera. He was probably the biggest one that we had on camera. And, you know, it was late December, early January. The rut was pretty much wrapped up for where we were. And Rick and I were like, you know, like it's a small property. The neighbors could see him. Maybe we should shoot TT if we see him, if we get a chance. You know, we don't have any other good deer on camera. You know, what are the odds that he'll make it through the summer?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, he still had a month of season left. You know, let's shoot him if we see him. So it was a year ago today or tomorrow, I can't remember. He came out in my little food plot, and I texted Rick. I was like, I see him. I see TT. And he was like, okay, well, are you going to shoot? And I was like, there's one problem. He's missing one side. He has already shed one side. And, you know, I was like, that was like God telling
Yep.
me,
Yeah.
telling us,
Exactly.
wait, be
I just got chill
patient.
bumps.
Things
Yes.
happen for a reason.
I did too, and I had my camera that day, and I just took so many pictures of him all after, even though he just had one side. You know, I was like, that was God's way of telling me, no, be patient, just wait.
Your daughter's been begging you to hunt since her little brother shot the big 8 last year. You've ran a fire, dissed the fields, got stuck, got unstuck. Planted food plots, fertilized, and prayed for rain. You moved trees, limbed roads, even bought one of those fancy cell cameras.
So what's your excuse?
LS Tractor.
The Furminator is the industry's most versatile piece of food plot equipment, allowing plotters to do every step of the process, working the soil, adding seed and soil supplements, and compacting, from start to finish with a single implement. It's hassle-free by design. Set it for the seed size and simply drive the tractor, and the Furminator does the rest. Check it out at thefurminator.com.
William, you were making a comment about the base had a little extra mass on it, and what that probably, if you had seen that, what you would have initially thought.
Yes, when we see antlers shed with that much pedicle attached, usually that's a death sentence.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say well more than over 50%, probably more like 9 out of 10 times, that deer would have been suffering from an abscess that had eaten down through the pedicle, weakened it, it's broken off, and the deer, if she had shown me that antler, I would have said that deer's probably dead before next year. But just proof that sometimes we're wrong. You never say never in nature, and you never say always.
It's just it didn't get infected for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because he was so healthy.
That's how, Jeff Foxworthy showed us all those sheds, and they've got that. He said that it's really bad from like Wisconsin, Minnesota, and I think their deer over there in Georgia came from that lineage. Mm-hmm. But he's talking about, I mean, it's
like a bird that grows down.
Yeah,
there.
they lose a ton of their deer.
We were talking about that before we started recording, before you were here, and William can probably extrapolate on that.
Yes, there's a bacteria that is more common along, and it's also over in Mississippi a lot, around here, Clay, Lowndes, Noxubee, Kemper. We see it in that part where people will come to me and go, I think I got a genetic problem. I got a bunch of deer with a spike on one side and a good healthy rack. That's that bacteria eating through that pedicle. We think that it's coming in when he sheds his antlers. There's an open sore for just a little while before it scabs over, and it starts to eat through that pedicle, eventually reaching the brain. And, a lot of bucks die of brain abscesses. They're fighting. Nobody knows this. They try to kill one another.
Yes,
they do. And they will eventually, sometimes they succeed. They get an infection that eats through. But in this area, there's a lot more of that because of that unique bacteria that is here. Mm-hmm. And so I would have figured that's what that was. 100%. I'm glad I was wrong.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That's why I asked the question, because if I'd have found that, I'd been like, oh, it's over with.
Yeah, I think maybe it was Bronson. Somebody way back when, it could have been his predecessors, were warning us about judging deer too quick that had like one side or a spike and a good horn on the other side. You might want to be sure and wait if you can keep up and wait another year. And sure enough, I've seen that where just in the years, I guess 15 years taking pictures that we have had, it'll come in waves. So it can't be truly genetic if it comes in waves, where we've had a bad bout of like, man, we got so many deformed racks. What is going on? This is awful. And I'm not talking about just, misshaped or whatever, just like one's missing almost everything on one side, even from the summer on. And then in a year or two, it's almost all gone. It's like, so it has to be what he's talking about,
And this one got out of it pretty good, except there's a couple of, weird points close to the base.
Actually gave him some trash that made him more character.
A little more character.
Yeah, if anything.
I love it. So I'm anxious to hear the whole story. This year, you going in the woods and seeing this deer and pulling the trigger. What happened?
Well, so we had pictures of him all summer long in velvet, and at Mississippi started the velvet season. So I got my velvet permit, and I actually
We
ended
love
up
that, by the way.
harvesting a really great deer in velvet, and on a different property. And I had several people ask me, like, why in the world were you not hunting this deer during the velvet season? He was just a little more inconsistent than this other deer I killed was. He was just like every afternoon and every morning coming out to soybeans, whereas TT was kind of, we got regular pictures of him, but not as consistent as this other deer. So I went after the other deer, and I'm thankful I was able to harvest him with my bow. My first buck with my bow, and it was in velvet.
That's a
So
heck of a
that's
deer.
awesome.
I saw it. I saw a picture of him.
So what was his name? Poo Poo by chance? Okay, just checking.
Usually Bobby has the corn pile jokes.
no doubt.
I had to
What
do
is
it.
going
I'm
on?
sorry.
Dudley's bringing
Wake
it
up,
today.
Richie.
I mean, whoa.
No, someone asked me, like, TT is in going to the bathroom? I was like, no, it's all 10. I didn't think about that, I guess, when we named him. But, yeah, we got pictures of him all through the summer in velvet. And I guess probably the first picture, when he really kind of finished out growing was late August. And we were like, wow, he really blew up. And I went after this other deer during the velvet season, and I was at Mississippi State too, so I didn't have a ton of time to hunt in the fall. But every chance that Rick and I had during bow season, we were out there, and we're real, like, we hunt the wind. We're not going to go out there unless the wind was just perfect, because we did not want to risk bumping him off the place. And I saw him, I think it was November 4th is when I saw him. And like I said, that was just as amazing as the hunt when I killed him. I sent the video of him to my dad because he was that close. I could just take a video of him. And my dad was like, that's probably really amazing, just being that close to a deer that big. And he was
knowing
like,
that you contributed to growing him.
and just watching him be a deer out there. And he was the first one in the field and the last one to leave. I watched him all afternoon, and Rick was actually hunting not too far, and he would kind of go in the woods and go towards Rick's direction. I'd be like, Rick, he's coming towards you. He's coming your direction. And he was like, okay, I'm ready. And then he would come back out into my field. I think he was checking scrapes or working scrapes in the woods, and he would come right back out and to his little compadres, the younger bucks that were with him. But yeah, and we kept getting pictures of him. He was consistent, and we hunted every chance we could. And that was kind of that. It's a smaller food plot, a smaller field, and we leave standing beans strategically in the fields where we hunt. And we hunted every chance we could, and I never got. I think Rick during bow season saw him on the other end of the field, probably 200 yards or so. But he said the same thing. He was like, "Wow!" It was just really cool getting to see him. And actually, the afternoon, it was Thanksgiving Day that I killed him that afternoon. We were late to the deer stand, of course, because Thanksgiving lunch dragged out, and we probably didn't get to the stand till 3:30. And I had spent every time I hunted down here, I was just kind of like, okay, when am I gonna see him? From the moment I got in the stand, I was like, okay, I'm ready. When am I gonna see him? And this particular day, I was kind of like, oh, I'm just kind of hunting. I'm just here. We're late. I'm probably not gonna see a whole lot, and he always was running with a smaller buck, and my field filled up with does. It was 10 or so does out there, and I just wasn't really thinking about it. And that's when he stepped out and he did that thing. He was just looking, looking at his does.
That thing.
Yes, I know all about that.
That thing you do.
Yeah.
Watching his does, and I was texting back and forth with Rick, and I put my phone down real quick, and I think I first saw him, he was about 170 yards, so not very close, and he came out and he was walking straight away from me, and I was like, I'm pretty sure that's him. So I put up my binoculars, and I saw that hook coming off of his G2, and I was like, that's him. I was like, that's him. And I was like, I put my binoculars down. I was like, okay, I need to shoot, the first chance he gives me, because he was walking straight away from me. and he started kind of pushing does around. He had got out to about 200, and he turned broadside. And I'm, which everyone probably is, but I'm so bad about rushing my shots. I'm terrible about that. Like, I just put the crosshairs on him and just shoot. And, you know, I put my gun up and I was watching him, and he was standing perfectly broadside and he was feeding. You know, it was just a perfect shot. And I kind of flinched. I almost pulled the trigger, and I was like, no. I was like, stop. You know, because I was like, I have to take my time, and I have to get this right. You know, this was kind of, I was nervous, but I was also like, you know, I have to get this right, and I cannot miss him. He's liable to leave and just never come back. I don't want to wound him. And, you know, I finally felt comfortable, and he was still perfectly broadside and feeding. And so I shot, and he didn't, you know, which granted he was only standing probably 10 or 15 yards off the tree line, but he kind of just ran in the woods. He didn't do anything really that told me that
kick
he didn't mule kick. He didn't, you know, hunch up or anything. I mean, we all hope that they drop.
What caliber are you shooting?
30-06.
Okay, and out of a Browning rifle, I assume.
Yeah.
Okay,
yes,
go
sir.
ahead.
But and I texted Rick. I was like, I shot her. No, I called him. Of course, I didn't text him, but I called him, and I was like, I shot him. I was like, I feel really good about it. My gut feeling says, yes, that was perfect. But, you know, he didn't really react. And Rick was like, well, it sounded like you nailed him. And it sounded like it made good contact. And I was like, well, I'll call my dad. And so I did. I hung up the phone with Rick, and I called my dad. And, you know, why else would I be calling him at 4:45 in the afternoon? My dad answered and said, you get him? And I was like, well, I think so. And he was already like, okay, I'm coming. He was hunting like nearby around our house, and I could hear him already getting his stuff together in the stand. And I was like, I mean, I hope I did. He didn't really react, but I felt great about my shot. I really took my time, and the place is kind of set up. He had to drive right by where Rick was hunting to get back to where I was. So he was like, okay, well, I'll pick Rick up on my way in and just hang tight right there. And it was so hard for me to not go down there and at least look for blood. And I think I called Rick back, and I was like, I think I'm going to go down there and just look for blood and see if I can find where I shot him. Rick was like, don't you go down there. He was like, don't you go down there. He could be laying just right in the weeds, and I want to be there when you find him. I was like, okay. So I got down out of my stand, and it was a beautiful sunset that day too. I was just taking it in and just
I'm picturing it.
I know I took a picture on my phone of the sunset, and I was just taking it in, and it was such a nice day too. It was such a pretty day. And anyway, my dad and Rick get back there, and we kind of pull the truck down to where I shot him, and we found a little spot of blood, but I was like, okay, well, I hit him. You know, I still don't really like, you know, this just a little bit. And Rick and I start walking into the woods, and I think we found maybe a little bit more blood, but I was like, I really don't like that. And I literally, and my dad's so impatient. He went out in front of us, and because it was kind of on the edge of a break. We have CRP, and kind of on the edge of a break. And so my dad kind of went in front of us and kind of made a loop. And, you know, I turned to Rick, and I was like, maybe we should just call a dog, because I do not want to bump him, and maybe we should just back out and come back tomorrow or something. And I don't think I even got those words out of my mouth. And my dad said, I got him.
Got him.
And I was just like, oh my gosh. I was like, that was the biggest relief ever. And, you know, we're like dipping through the woods trying to get back there to where he was. And it was a perfect shot, just like I felt it was. And he only ran probably 70 yards or so. And it was funny. My dad was standing at the deer, and I could see his flashlight shining down on him, but there was kind of a big tree stand between me and my dad, and Rick was in front of me. He was running faster than I was trying to get to him, and Rick was in front of me and got up to the deer, and I couldn't really see his antlers yet. And Rick got up to him, and he said, oh my gosh. And I was like, oh gosh. And I get up to him and it's just like all those feelings coming together at one time. And it was amazing. Like I just sat down beside him and I was just like, oh, do you know how much stress you put me through these 3 years?
Oh, what a great! You tell it.
I mean,
you tell
I
it
was
so
on-
good
yeah.
too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Moultrie has pioneered the game management category. Today, Moultrie is one of the best-selling brands of feeders and seeders in the world, and they continue to innovate with new technology that gamekeepers will rely on. Moultrie products are always field-tested and designed for hunters by hunters, combining forward-thinking innovation with time-tested practicality. Moultrie, first in feeders since 1979. All right, so guys, Moultrie is offering our listeners a 15% site-wide discount at MoultrieFeeders.com. Use code Mossy Oak with a capital M, Mossy Oak, at MoultrieFeeders.com and get that 15% discount. Take a sip of water, relax just a second there. But William, this is what your job is about, is growing deer like this and making the memories that this young lady has. It's just has got to be very rewarding.
Very much so. And as I've been sitting here thinking about the stories, seeing the deer the year before, seeing the deer the year before that, and I think about, call it perspective, call it the age of management, call it your paradigm. But think about, us guys sitting here, we got a couple of younger ladies in the room. My daughter, Caroline, they're seeing way different than what we saw when we started hunting. We've been hunting for a few decades. And I remember when your Mossy Oak came out, Toxie, I remember buying it right off as soon as it came out. Wow. We were out hunting there. But back in those days, back in the 80s is when I started hunting with my dad. And what'd we shoot back then?
Anything with antlers visible above hairline.
And everyone we possibly could that the law would allow. And so does were a no-no. There were a few doe days we tried to shoot a doe during that time frame, but I can remember sitting in the Noxubee River swamp and just watching doe, and like the 16th deer that walks by has 2-inch spikes, pull the trigger.
Yeah,
that's right. And but then we start going into, okay, well, our agency, well before I'm a part of the agency, they're beginning a DMAP program. They're trying to initiate some people into shooting does. I hear from the older biologists that when I got hired and they had that first club meeting down in Kemper County, that was where DMAP originated, on the edge of Kemper and Noxubee counties, right down the road here. It's been copied by almost every state that's got white-tailed deer in some form or fashion since then.
A lot of them call it DMAP.
They do.
They do call it DMAP.
So you're saying the first DMAP program was right, which started here in Mississippi?
Right down here on the Kemper and Noxubee lines on a few properties, yes.
Never knew that.
And
That's
the biologists used to talk about they kept the car running. They were in station wagons for our agency back in. They kept them running, and they had armed officers with them because they were afraid they were going to get shot that night for telling about they needed to shoot some does.
Is that right?
And it was that much angst about trying to shoot some does. And populations were getting out of control over a lot of the state even then. But the sentiment, so when I start in 2001, there's still a lot of that sentiment out there of we're not going to shoot does, but things have started changing back in the 90s. Remember the 4-point law? Way back in 95, and all of a sudden people realized they get bigger if they get older. And, all of a sudden people are harvesting the biggest deer of their life, but they're having to let deer go. So things have changed so much over those years. From passing young bucks on because law required it, to voluntarily passing young bucks, to voluntarily passing legal bucks. And now we're in an age of, I call it the individual deer management. Just like what Caroline's looking at here. They saw him last year. A lot of people would have shot that deer with one antler, y'all. That deer would have got shot even though he had one antler, and they'd have got a taxidermist to build another one to have him mounted with. But The deer this year, I'm hearing big deer harvested all over the state.
Yeah.
Most of the time when I'm talking to those hunters, they're like, we got photos of him last year and the year before. And it's been that more individual management, just like y'all did, and letting these deer grow up. And you look at him and he's 140, 145 inch deer last year, or maybe a tad bigger. No, about 140s. And most people would have harvested that deer as a really good deer, but he got mature, or he got near mature.
Yeah.
And now people are letting these deer go across the state, and I would say in unprecedented numbers. They're letting deer go from 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 or even 5 to 6.
Yeah.
And they're seeing them be able to fully mature out there. And that, I can sit here and tell you we're killing bigger deer because we had a better year when they were born. Yeah, they're a little better, but they were good deer last year that somebody likely passed in order to be a giant deer this year.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
100%.
Age class.
Absolutely.
So if a deer like that hits the ground, how long does it take before you get a text from somebody telling you about it?
You want minutes or hours?
Yeah, so it's pretty fast.
It's
then.
pretty fast.
Yeah.
I'm hearing about deer like that pretty regular
Yes.
and through the season. And this has been an exceptional year. But I go back to nearly every one of them, people are saying, well, we saw him last year. And either he somehow made it through and they were trying to harvest him, or in most of the cases, they're choosing not to. Even though he's a really good deer. They're letting him go. They're seeing him go one more year, and they're going, okay, we're going to take him this year. But times have certainly changed since we were shooting those 3-inch spikes back in the 80s.
So
Yeah, I remember my first deer was at a hunting camp that had DMAP. I think it was 1991-ish. 91. And I saw 55 does in one hunt.
Oh yeah, I can.
Ward Lake.
So I grew up
55
hunting.
does.
I grew up hunting in Southwest Alabama, where they had deer and turkeys when nobody had them, just about. And the limit was a deer a day.
Yep.
Bobby grew up in Alabama, so he remembers that too. It was a deer a day for a 100 days, 90 day season,
Yeah.
or more actually. And it was so completely out of whack. And that was, until they introduced shooting does, that was a generation of like, that's bucks.
yes.
So you literally would hear people killing like 20-something bucks a year.
Yes.
2 points, 4 points, 5 points, 5 points, 8, just every deer they could shoot. And it just, and they thought that was, we need to shoot more because we got too many deer. Well, thank goodness for.
And we thought we
recent-
needed to shoot spikes too.
I know.
We were told to shoot spikes back in those days.
But I can still remember the first time having the awareness of the spike may be something different as Dr. Jacobson that far back. And they had someone found a fawn and gave it to them at state for the deer pen, and it was a spike. It was, a nice spike, but I remember seeing a picture of it, and it turned out to be a Boone and Crockett deer when it got to be.
I remember that. Yeah, I heard about that.
So
yeah.
that, that dispelled that right away,
So, Carol, let me ask you a question. You just recently got married, right?
I did.
So
June
this
10th.
Rick you calling that is your husband?
It is.
Did Rick know about this deer prior to y'all getting engaged?
Oh, that is a great question.
Now, Bobby, that has no relevance.
I think it's very relevant.
Because if that would have mattered, he would have shot the deer or hunted it. He's obvious this guy is in it for the long haul. This is going to be a 60, 70-year-old marriage where they hunt on into the late life.
Hope so.
Yeah,
Because I don't know why you even asked that,
I
because
was
she
just
shot
curious.
the deer.
Well, that's true.
That's true.
Well, it's funny, like, we kind of both talked about it, and we were like, well, just we knew how big he was. We were like, it's kind of whoever sees him first.
But I'm going where I want to go. Yeah.
I'm down with
He
his
did
wisdom.
give me pick.
You
First
did get
pick
picked?
of
Well, good. for
what
him.
stands.
Chivalry is not dead.
And I like that she called her dad. What
Yeah,
a great
yeah,
way
that's
to
a
do
good-
it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
That's
that's
That was
good.
a really good story.
Yeah, it's awesome. Awesome deer.
Yeah, I'm really thankful that, but all three of us have been able to kill really great deer, 150 to 160 inch, 4.5-year-olds. And I've killed several. Rick has killed several. And my dad has walls full of them, and when we saw him, and he looked like that, we were like, we got several deer on the wall that kind of resemble this. Let's, if we're going to let one walk and give him one more year, this is going to be the one to do it, because, he stayed so close. He was a homebody. He never really, we always got pictures of him, and he was pretty consistent. We were like, let's see if we can get, a 190, one a little bigger, which a great, a 150 to 160 inch is amazing deer. But, we were like, let's see if this one will make it.
Y'all did it.
Yeah,
absolutely
he did.
Done.
Y'all did, and it did.
What did he end up weighing?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and we didn't weigh him. But we think 220 to 230. It's interesting that I learned that about the bacteria in his pedicle. I was looking back at old camera pictures, and it kind of looked like his body was healthier last year than this year, the year that I harvested him. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but
could have been the drought too.
Yeah,
that's true.
So what is your career now? Are you working for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife?
I am. Yes, I'm a contract worker, and I just do WMA work.
It's our favorite agency
in our region.
Don't say just.
Sorry.
Don't say just. I've heard good things about her work in the North Delta. Really good things, and that's a very important job, and we appreciate having you there.
Good.
Yeah, Caroline, we're just real proud of you. This is just a great story. You tell it well. A heck of a deer.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Dudley,
much.
she knows more about deer hunting than you will ever know.
She does.
Bobby?
I can't disagree
I learned a
with
lot
that.
of it from this one over here, my dad.
Yeah,
No, that's cool.
How about that?
And at Mississippi State.
Well, they're teaching a lot of stuff over there. There's no doubt about that. But we want to come right back to you and ask you, the state, is it the state or is it the South? Are we seeing big deer dropping in other states? Are you keeping your finger on the pulse of that?
I talked to the other deer coordinators, and it seems, I'm not going to speak for them this season. I will say our season this year has been exceptional.
Yeah.
We started making a push back in September as an agency. Our deer numbers have been going up.
Yes.
And if we're going to keep deer like this, we've got to check that increase. And we have numbers out there where we get population estimates. It's called a population reconstruction. So I can't ever tell you how many deer, they don't stand still and be counted. So we go backwards and we go, okay, well, if we killed this many deer that were 3 years old this year, and this many that were 4 and this many that were 5, they had to be alive 3 years ago. They had to be alive 4 years ago. So you go backwards and you see how many deer we had about 5 years ago. Then you look at harvest rates, and it's a lot of guesswork involved in this, but it gets us really close. It's the best estimate we got of a deer population. Our deer population is at or near an all-time record high.
Well,
from what we're seeing, we don't, no doubt about it.
And my thought on that is, and this is just me driving around, but I think the habitat is not quite as good as it was. The pine timber it's hard to sell that right now, and
Correct.
so there's
and
not
has
as much.
been for a few years.
There's not that. This doesn't have anything to do with the Delta though, but everywhere else, there's a lot of closed canopy pines, and stuff isn't getting thinned, and. So while our population's going up, I think, we're
I'm going to introduce one other thing.
losing a little food and cover.
Yeah,
What's that?
I'd go with that, but I'd also say deer are the most adaptive
Yeah,
thing I've
100%.
ever known in wildlife. And they are way more suburban deer. There are way more deer in all areas of the Delta. The Delta was void of deer just about.
Yeah.
And then when they moved in there much, they were gigantic. I remember a bunch of 300-pound deer in the South Delta being killed.
God.
And so, I just think there are more areas they've
That's what I
adapted
want.
to everything. I can probably go back behind my house and see more deer in an afternoon. And I live in the city limits. We don't hunt there. You can see more deer than if you went out to a hunting club.
We sure can in my house.
So they've really adapted, I think, to suburban life.
Nosler is known for their bullets, and now they're making suppressors. Nosler suppressors are made for hunting. Adding a Nosler suppressor to your rifle will make you a quieter, more accurate, and more effective hunter. Protect your hearing and disturb less game with a nozzle suppressor. The time to hunt quiet is now. Learn more at nosler.com.
Hey guys, Dudley from Gamekeepers here. I want to tell you about the all-new Gunner Dog Bowl. It's designed for home and built for travel. It's customizable, leak-resistant, light on weight, solid on durability, and rust-proof. Like other Gunner products, they're made in Nashville and designed for everywhere.
Well, so early this year, the y'all's department started communicating and asking hunters to take their limit. I don't remember anybody
or
ever
at least shoot more deer than they have been within their legal limit. The average hunter in the state is down to shooting 1.6 deer a year.
Mm-hmm.
The average successful hunter. Now, you asked me for a trivia question.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
Here we go.
we look at the population as a whole. We have these estimates going all the way back to the late 70s of how many deer were out there. And we get a hunter estimate, a harvest estimate, where we do a 5% survey of licensed hunters out there. So we see how many hunters get killed. By the way, we're the only state out there that does not have a mandatory reporting or tagging system for gun season and whitetail deer. And I still say we need that. We need that.
Yeah, I'm all about that.
But
Yes.
so if we have this many deer in the population, and the population right now is about 1.5 million, just over is what our numbers are saying, what percent of the deer need to be harvested by licensed hunters to keep the population level?
To keep it at 1.5?
To keep it at right about level. So I've been going back now. I've looked at this data since the 80s, and I go, okay, well, they harvested this many deer, and we had a population estimate of this. And so they harvested this percent of the population. Is my question clear?
Yeah.
What percent of the total deer herd out there do we need to harvest by licensed hunters?
I was going to say 35.
I was going to say 27.
But Dudley,
40.
I was going to say a third, but that's
think
close to Bobby's.
33.
Well, if you go 34, if you
So let me preface. I
By
said
hunters.
licensed hunters.
Oh.
So under 16 and over 65, because we got no way of knowing what they're harvesting in our state.
Yeah, my
Because
12-year-old's mowing them down.
There you go. And my daughter over there, she's harvested a lot of deer before she got her hunting license. She had to get a license this year. She just turned 16.
Are we even close?
No.
50. We're obviously going to get this one wrong.
Y'all are shooting fish in a barrel.
Yes, trying.
I think he's finally got y'all.
Yeah.
Your streak will be over.
We're going to
It
edit
may
this,
be,
don't
yeah.
worry.
Y'all ready?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's 21.
21. I was close
He's
to
very
25.
Yeah,
So,
well,
what were you? What'd you get?
Oh, I was like 40 on the first
Hey,
day.
I'm 27.
He did 40, then 20. I mean, he was getting.
I was in the
Complicated
20s at
question.
least.
Deductive reasoning.
Well, maybe I was close at a third because that
Yes,
would account for another
33.
12% through.
yeah.
I was shocked years ago when Dr. Woods let us understand the super high mortality of bucks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Natural
interesting.
mortality. And if
Much
I'm
higher
not
than
mistaken,
those.
yeah, you would lose if you just left them alone. And I think some of this came from further north. The further north, winter's harder on them, so it's worse. But I think you lose half of them, or 40%, something like that, from like birth to be, a full-grown buck. And also remember the isn't that about right?
You're right. Yes.
So, that's why the other point to make to everybody is if you're going to have deer, much less get to the size of hers, just the age of hers, you're going to have to really work at letting bucks go and harvesting does because you're going to continually, nature's going to try to get your herd out of balance.
Right.
Just like it happened, years ago where there's like 20, 30 does per buck.
Yeah.
It was just terrible.
It was terrible.
So, nature's working against you because the does have very low natural mortality. Bucks have a very high natural mortality.
Lanny, you had a
it's part
question?
of the thing.
Yeah, just talking about this, I've always wondered, and I know you can't be very specific about this, but like a general rule of thumb, maybe you have to go divide the state up into a couple of areas, but how, if you could say a general rule of thumb, and maybe you can't, of how many does I need to harvest per 100 acres.
If you left that's very
Very variable. I understand by
state.
habitat.
So at southeast Mississippi, way less than say the Big Black Corridor or the Tibby River bottom here, Tibby Creek bottom here. Deer densities are so different. So what I'm going to say is that if you walk away from a deer herd and you let nature take its course, like what Toxie was saying, it tends to go to about 3 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where it balances out at, is about 3 does per buck. And as hunters, we tend to take, at least used to, take more bucks than does. And that then would push those buck to doe ratios way up there to 1 to 8, 1 to 10. Some really terrible numbers that may even lead to some of the does not getting bred. So what I'd say to you is you need to be harvesting 3 does for every buck you harvest.
I think we're on that. We're pretty close.
And so,
or more.
We're better.
More.
and if
Yeah,
you're
we're better than
still
that.
seeing a lot, I know it sounds too easy to be this easy to say how to do my job, but if you see a lot of those, you need to shoot more, y'all.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
It ought not be easy to go out and be able to shoot one.
Yeah, I was
on any given
I was
day.
field,
Oh, man.
I was field dressing a doe at 3:00 the other day and was watching other deer walk around
We
me.
need to shoot more. Yeah, that's right.
So right now, William, I'm seeing does that still have their yearlings with them, or still have fawns with them, that they don't have spots. I saw some the day before Christmas and the day after Christmas trying to nurse, and that's the latest I've ever noticed it.
So they'll nurse all the way through into January, but just some does, well, kind of like
Moms.
humans, I guess.
They vary.
Moms, they vary. Some will wean them off earlier than others, but one of the things we are seeing this year is some really small fawns. That's because of the drought.
Yeah.
The drought. So the drought didn't have much of an impact on antlers this year because it began after most of the antler growth was done. The drought we had was primarily July, August, September, October. And so most of these antlers, like this buck in front of us, he was mostly done growing by July when stuff started to get bad.
Yeah.
And then what we are seeing is body weights down. So
those fawns hit the ground, and Mama's out there trying to make a living, and it's just not there.
remember earlier I said it comes from a healthy mom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that year they're born in matters a lot. The deer born this year, I'm not going to say they can't get to be really nice deer, but if you look at them as a whole and look at averages, they're going to probably be below average
In 5
when
to
we
6
get
years.
these deer to 5 to 6 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because
They're stressed.
Yeah, we're hearing, moms even need 16% protein for the fawns to release their genetic potential, and it's not going to happen.
And Bronson was telling us how many calories a lactating
bunch.
doe needs, and it was an astounding number.
Yeah, didn't they take a dry matter and they took a bunch of like plastic flowers and stacked it up? With some
Yeah, that was trying to do
that
an
was
example, but he was saying
Dr.
20,000
Damaris's,
calories a day.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
For
Even no calories more
for
than I do.
a doe with 2 fawns, 20,000 a day.
So average harvest 3 to 1 on does to bucks.
Or more.
Yeah, or more.
Or more.
We're at
I'd
10
always,
to 1.
I'd always, for years, listened to management people trying to get us to aim towards 2 to 1 instead of 3 to 1. That would be a healthier herd. And think about how much you got to harvest with the bucks going, 10 to 1 over does naturally. And then the other thing is that a healthiest herd would be close to that, 2, maybe 3. But also when you can, like if you just left them alone for a long time, you would also have about the same or close to the same in every age class, or closer than if you're shooting them all the time. So if you could, you can't ever get there. You're not going to have as many, 5-year-olds as the same as you have, 1.5-year-olds. But it's like if you get it closer to being equaled out, you have such a healthier herd. And the other thing they said, you will see every mature deer when the rut hits, because they will be going crazy trying to breed the does that are there and fighting. And there's so much more activity. Your hunting experience is better too.
I'm glad you bring it up, Toxie, because I don't know for my whole 2 decades plus career have heard, I'm not going to shoot those does because I'm going to let them pull those bucks onto my place.
I know.
Well, what good is it if it pulls him onto your place and they stay bedded up all day long beside her?
That's exactly
and
what's
you
going
never
on.
get to see him. So The best properties that I've managed over the years, they try to take out as many does of their quota as possible during archery and the early primitive and the Thanksgiving gun hunt. And they whack them right then. And of course, you know, for our listeners out of state listening, the rut in these places is going to be mid-December through early January. So they're taking them out 2 or 3 weeks to months prior to. Now think how much food we're saving for each one of those from each one of those does. So, but the competition when those does come into season, and you've got bucks out there chasing them, I have seen exactly the opposite occur on the properties that take the does early. They see the bucks that are there. The bucks, there's 3, 4 bucks chasing a doe. They're seeing more rutting activity. They're hearing fights. They're hearing grunting, as opposed to they go into just a full-fledged, rut lockdown. How many times you heard that?
I haven't seen that.
The biggest thing that'll get one of those old deer killed, in my opinion, is you get to the rut and he can't find one.
And he's walking.
Yeah, and that's what he's going to move.
it.
I mean, your chance of seeing him is a direct,
Love the post
relationship to how much they have to move.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing worse, like you say, there's nothing worse than you could have all the deer, best place in the state, but if they're not moving, you're not going to see deer. But I think, like around here, even when they're out of whack a little bit, I've been saying this on a lot of podcasts, we always see, and we're seeing it right now, some of the very best deer are killed at the very end of the rut or just as the rut's, quit almost. And they all of a sudden can't find a doe. And all I was saying is if you reduce those does, if they got to work to find the does, you're going to see a lot more of them.
Mm-hmm.
So, William, I've got one. Can you explain the scenario about when and how the mom runs off the button buck?
When she starts coming into season, coming into estrus, she's going to tip. Lily Grace and I were hunting last week, Noxubee County, and we climb in a stand. We're looking over a big grass field, native grass with a food plot planted beside it, and all we were seeing were fawns. There's a fawn over here. There's a fawn behind us. There's another fawn came out over here. There's another fawn over there. And those does had left those fawns for now. Now, what we will also see is once they've been run for 2 or 3 days, they're going to come back and find that fawn, and then they're going to stay with them for quite possibly all the way till next year and on into next November. But they're going to leave. Now, that button buck, there's been some research out there where the doe actually causes him to disperse. And now some of them are going to disperse whether you harvest that doe or not. But we've often said if you have a choice on a doe, shoot one that has a buck fawn versus one that has a doe fawn. Because there's a higher likelihood now that buck fawn that you've raised under good management, this is assuming you have good management on your property. If you don't, then, you might want him to leave and get a new one in. But if you've been doing good management, you want the deer that grew up under a healthy doe. Now, all of what I just said brings into cooperatives, getting your neighbors to work with you so that when that buck fawn disperses away, or you get a new one in from 4 or 5 miles away, and he's typically coming right around October, November. When you see all these 1-year-old bucks moving around the landscape, that's kind of when they're finding their new home. You want one from a good, well-managed place because he's going to be, let's forget his genetics because you couldn't control that. What you can control is that he came from an area. If you've got neighbors that are working well in managing their deer herd as well, you're getting just as good a deer as you're losing. Everybody is through the scenario there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
So that, again, it hard. It was nature's way of preventing
Inbreeding.
Yes.
Yeah. Huh.
Which is cool. But it also, that dispersal just helps everything, I think, too. So
the doe fawn stays put. She lives right there by mom's home range, and the buck fawn takes off.
The mom runs him off, right?
Mostly, but even if she's been removed, some of them will still leave. It's just an instinct. Nature is going to make some of them, but he is more likely to leave if she's still there.
How does she run him off? Is she
just aggression?
Yeah. You've been kicked by a deer.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've
hurts.
seen that.
Kicking in the head.
I have been kicked by a deer.
Man, that's got to be a little
It's
rough
kind of like
on
your
me.
mom didn't want you in the house.
Yeah, she
wanted-
broke your plate.
If
told
I
you to get out of
remember,
here.
I think
I mean,
it
you were
came-
like 40, but I mean, she at least broke.
I think it came out of Georgia originally, but I just remember the research saying it was pretty profound how far they get away from her, like a mile and a half plus, that they'll get away from where she is. It's some kind of almost like repellent.
And that's habitat related. You go to where they are in the Delta, and it may be 10 or 15 miles just
right.
because of the breaks in the habitat. So,
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because, a couple weeks ago, I was trying to get my younger cousin her second deer. She's killed one, but I wanted her to kill another one. And I was like, man, all we are seeing are fawns. Like, we had 8 fawns right here in front of us. I was like, really don't want your second deer to be a 70-pound fawn,
Yeah.
But I never thought about that. That makes perfect sense that the doe gets run off. And I was like, gosh, all these fawns, that's all we're seeing.
We in the heyday of whitetails.
I think we are, Bobby. We've never had this many deer on the landscape. Maybe close, but we've never had this many adult bucks on the landscape. Our DMAP numbers show that we're bumping over 70% are 3-year-old and older in the harvest nowadays.
Oh,
Wow.
That's incredible.
So
I had
it's
no
just-
idea.
Go Mississippi.
I mean, we
Yes.
got to be tops.
I
We got to
mean-
be tops.
We led that for several years, and I'm not sure how we fell last year in the NDA's lineup, but we use that DMAP data, and for several years we were at the top on the percent of older deer, and they asked for 3-year-old plus. I then went ahead and broke it down to 4-year-old plus. It was over 50% of those were 4-year-old and older on
Nice.
DMAP. So we're harvesting more mature deer than we've ever have in history. So by default, some of them are going to be some really big ones.
Oh, yeah.
Good ones. Like this one.
Yeah.
So that's a good question. I wrote down earlier, and it's I think it's typically the same nationally and all. But what do you think in our world here under good conditions? What's that peak age that you would want to let a deer go to?
For absolute best antler
Yeah,
quality?
I realize he probably could tie 2 years. It's not a one spot, but what would you shoot for if you felt like you had his control, a big enough place they were pretty much going to still be there?
6.
That's what I was thinking.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you look at the law averages, he's 92% as big as he's going to be at 4.
Right.
That deer did not follow the law of averages.
No.
He went way more than 8% bigger from 4 to 5.
Oh my gosh.
And so,
Well, like 50% bigger.
yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing that occurred to me is how can you, even the best of us cannot tell for sure. I mean, the best way to know how old a deer is if you positive ID him at a younger age. When it's 1, 2, even 3 is a lot easier to tell than the difference between a 5 and a 6. So that's the hard part for I think the average guy, which I promise you I consider myself very average about that.
And there's also a lot of mature bucks running around that don't have a big set of antlers. You know,
I
I think that-
absolutely. We've let good deer go and go and go.
You know,
and they're just very average.
I think the average in the better parts of our state is at what, 125-ish?
Well, that makes the Magnolia Records program record books a net 125. So that should tell you, when we looked at all the data over the years, statewide, not Delta deer, you're going to find more make it.
Yeah.
But overall, a lot of deer mature out at well under 125 inches.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And I get so many these days, I tell y'all, it's so funny to see the differences just in my career of deer management from people, well, if you would let him go, he actually would get bigger, to now people sending me, well, I shot this 5-point that we've been letting go, and how old do you think he is? And I'm like, he's a gummer. He's like 7, 8+ years old. And they're like, well, we were going to find the guy for shooting him. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't.
That's right.
So trying to judge by the hoof, because a lot of times those mature deer with smaller antlers also have smaller bodies. People want to attribute body size, not conformation, to their age.
Yep.
So you may get a 150-pound buck right around here that could be 6-year-old and have a real small rack, but be a mature deer. And, you know, I still say trophies, antlers are certainly trophies, but so are jawbones. If you can get a deer to 6+ years old and harvest that buck, regardless of his size, when you get one like Carolyn killed here, though, that's just a little bit, that's icing on the cake.
So what are some of the older deer that are you hearing about 9-10-year-old deer being killed around the state occasionally?
So we just can't age them.
I was going to ask you, could you tell for sure? Could you send it to a lab at Mississippi State or somewhere and cut the teeth and look at a microscope? Is there a way to know for sure?
Well, Toxic, you know, there's a lot of discrepancy in that method as well. It's called the cementum annuli of looking at an incisor teeth. And I've seen studies where it would be 2 or 3 years off based on different teeth of the same deer. And so now, is the technique more reliable when they get really old? Yes, I think it is. I age deer to 8+ on the teeth, but I've looked at a lot of known age jawbones. And I also know that I'm wrong a lot of the times when they get older.
Yeah, we had places that were clay soil prairie, and then some on the river that had super sandy soil, and there was a massive difference in the wear. Basically, the sandy soils, every deer you killed, even it maybe was a little too young, had worn teeth, and we would kill some deer in the prairie that would not even be worn, and there's no way. I mean, I remember a deer getting hit just north of town, actually opposite our farm, and he's mounted in the store now. We took the jawbone to Johnny Lanier, who's aged thousands and thousands of deer, and he just got pale. He said, "That's no way. That's a 2.5-year-old deer." He said, "But I'm telling you, them there's 2.5-year-old teeth."
Teethies. That was a huge deer.
That was
it was a giant. But he'd been eating soybeans his whole life too. But my point is, I think because he's in the prairie, you just don't have the wear, and it didn't jump at you as much.
And deer just wear differently. Some do. Some, just like we have different, you know, some of us have good teeth, some of us have bad teeth. Sometimes deer have the same thing as well, but.
And sometimes the deer chews on one side.
Surely they do.
And you may be pulling the other side.
And they may be 2 or 3 years different from one side to the other.
Yeah.
We tagged a bunch of deer for a research project through MSU over in Lowndes County. About 15 to 20 years ago. About 15 ago. And we had one of those research deer actually got hit a year ago. And we were tagging them as known age, fawns and 1-year-olds.
Right.
By color coding the tags, and actually was looking at how they grew up and getting folks to send us back photos. And Dr. Damaris drove over. He heard about the deer getting killed. He drove over. He got the jawbones of this deer, and he sent it to a bunch of us.
That was mean. I know it's
Every
coming.
one of us aged it at 4 or 5. She was 9.
Wow.
So what we've learned in all these known age jawbones is that when they start getting up there around 5-6 years old, we are not right quite often, close to half the time. However, we don't ever overage them. We never overage. If we call it 5, then there's about a 50 to 60% chance the deer is 5, another 30% that is 6, and then another percent chance that is 7, 8, 9, or 10. So we're getting a minimum age on them, I guess you would say. And that gets less accurate the older they get.
I mean, I just think there's the most important thing is actually not after the fact, but before the fact anyway. And I do think that people have paid, it's not easy. And so people have paid more attention in the last, say, even 10 years as this deer management advanced. And they're better able to just go, they can't look at a deer and feeding in a food plot and say he's 5.5. But that's an old deer, or that deer's really old.
Old enough.
Yeah, and that deer's, he may be at his peak. Look how old he is. You know, there's certain things you can see one is, wow. I mean, when you can't even tell the difference between his neck and his shoulder, it's probably time to let him get the good news, you know.
Yeah, we were just talking about this on the way here. Rick shot a deer about a month ago that, you know, looking at he said looking at him on the hoof, looking at his body, 3.5, 4.5, he didn't really have a big body. He was just a little 6 point. And, we just have too many deer on this property. So he shot him and, we were looking at him. We were like, yeah, 3.5, 4.5. We get the jawbone out. And this deer, I sent it to Brad and I've showed several people pictures of it. It is just smooth. Like his bottom teeth are shiny. I mean, and everyone I've showed it to has said that's at least 8 or so. But, they all say it's so hard to tell once they get that worn. And
Wow.
But we were like, wow. just looking at this deer, we were like, oh, that's, he just didn't get the nutrition he needed and he just turned out to be a 6 point. But really, he was old.
Yeah.
Hey, all of them aren't Michael Jordan.
And that's the kind of deer that somebody might get fined over, for.
But really, it was a great buck to take.
It
was
so,
perfect.
it is so subjective.
And that's
It really
something to be so proud of, too, just to be able to harvest an old deer like that. That's an important part.
As the head deer biologist in the state of Mississippi, what excites you the most when you look into the future, and what worries you the most?
Ooh.
Wow.
Don't answer if it puts you on the spot.
Yeah.
Oh, what excites me the most is seeing kids coming up in this age and still, as the nationwide average of hunters has been falling.
Been eroding, no doubt.
In Mississippi, we're holding our own on hunters. And the amount of deer out there, it's such a big protein source. We talk about antlers here, but, you run the numbers on how many deer were harvested just last season and run that in pounds of venison. You're running 8 or 9 million pounds of venison. We only got 3 million people in the state, folks. So does that get me excited that we have that natural resource out there? Absolutely. I look forward to what the future brings. Scares me. I don't even want to say those 3 letters. But
No,
CWD.
don't say.
I mean,
That's
it changes things, and it has to be recognized as a threat, and we have to understand that it is a threat and start working toward management techniques where it is.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, we're just really proud we got people like you
100%.
and Bronson and others that are looking out for us.
I'm really proud that we still have a high number of hunters going to school to become wildlife biologists.
No doubt
and
about
such.
it.
We call those hook and bullets.
Hook and bullets. Okay. I didn't know that. But
Well, Caroline, you fit that mold perfectly.
I do.
It sounds like you grew up in the outdoors,
I did.
and you've made it a big part of your life. You've certainly got a great story, and you got a great smile over there.
Thank you.
I for one have just thoroughly enjoyed listening to her tell her
this was,
story.
I was saying that the one with Bronson was my favorite deer one. Maybe it's this one. now.
Well, this one wasn't out yet. I mean, so you're fine.
190 inches of antler laying there on the table.
What an
killing
amazing
Bobby.
animal. You know what I mean?
It's killing Bobby. He
Yeah.
said it so many times. I don't even think he's looked at our host. He's been looking at the antlers the whole podcast.
Man.
Look at those eyes.
Glazed
Yeah,
over.
Yeah.
He glazes
Oh, glazed.
over worse than
Yeah.
anybody.
Yep.
I remember seeing the photo. It was right after Thanksgiving. I saw it on Instagram or Dudley sent
Whatever.
it to me, and it was just an impressive deer.
Well, thank you.
It really is.
I'm
So,
very proud.
well, so look, I know William's got to leave, but we've got one quick trivia question I'd like to ask Caroline if we could.
Oh, there we go.
So this week, Richie, I'm gonna turn it over to you. Can you tee us up real quick?
Trivia question is brought to us by Sheffield Financial,
That's right.
because your finances are not trivial.
No, they're not.
Sheffield is some great folks. If you're trying to buy a tractor or an ATV or get a deer mounted or
That's
something,
right.
they 14,000
Are
offices.
they
Lanny.
financing your mounts now?
I need to talk to him
Yeah,
about
you
that.
do.
Yeah, I need to talk to him about that. So anyway, thanks to Sheffield for being a part of this. And who we playing for?
We're playing for Mitchell Long, who left a review on Apple. The prize is some Allen meat bags and a gambrel.
He pronounced it correctly. I'll
So,
say
so,
it.
so,
Yeah.
listen, I'm going to throw this out here. I'm going to have to make sure I spell check what Bobby sends me
Yes.
Because I think he thinks I've turned into Anchorman, and that's why I read whatever's on the prompter.
How could you turn into something you already were all along? I don't get that.
So as he sends me misspelled words there and just hands me the note and says, read this.
The teleprompter was wrong. Lord. We have a teleprompter? Oh,
listen, so Mitchell is one of the first guys that's left us a review and left his name. Everybody else gives us these code
cryptic names.
Yeah. Calvin Klein left one the other day. C2 Farms. So here's my question.
Maybe it was Calvin Klein.
Yeah, I think it could have been.
Go ahead.
Does he have a hunting place?
Caroline, I'm looking at you now. What outdoor television show is rumored to be the Rolling Stones lead man Mick Jagger's favorite outdoor television show?
Oh my gosh.
And I'm told you've listened to a lot of podcasts, so this one I thought you'd figure it out.
What is Mick Jagger's favorite
hunting
outdoor television show?
Yeah, rumored to be.
Yes.
And we heard this from a member of the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'll give you a hint.
Okay, give me a hint, please.
We have a show.
Oh shoot.
It's similarly named to the podcast you're on right now.
Is it Gamekeeper?
Hey, she killed it. That's awesome.
You know, I tell you.
I'm sorry.
She's
I should've
clearly
gotten
focused
that
on
one.
this deer.
Yeah, she
did so good the whole time.
I mean, the antlers.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
clearly focused. We'll fix all that
Only
in
about the
post, so.
antlers. That's right. That was great.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mitchell.
Well,
He'll probably win anyway.
We'll take care of it. So. Well, we've really enjoyed this. Lanny, what would you say you learned?
I've learned that, in practice, the private land management works, and everybody, hunters being on the same page about listening to the biologists and the agencies about what's going on and taking conservation in your own hands. And it's working in Mississippi. Hearing what you were saying, that the average age class of bucks harvested has been 3 and 4 blows my mind. I'm like you. I grew up as brown as down. I never will forget when my dad was proud because he came in hunting. It was the first time he had ever passed a deer in his life, and so it's really cool to see the hunting community working with the agencies and taking the information that the agency gives them and making it practical. So. Is that too much?
Toxie, I'm going to give you the last words.
I mean, what I learned is, I guess, what our states and biologists and, people are asking us to do works. It really works, but it's not a one-hit wonder. And so I guess the point is, do the right thing and be patient. And it will all come to all of you that do that. Yeah. And don't get disappointed and, because it doesn't happen overnight either.
It's a long-term thing.
Yeah, and learn to enjoy the process. Well, like she did. I mean, even without this deer, what a great life she has with her wildlife and the whole journey they have with their whole family. That's the point of all of it. And guess what? After years of doing that, you get the benefit also, selfishly, bigger, better deer.
Mm-hmm. What'd you learn, Bobby?
I learned that Carolyn doesn't watch television.
Yeah.
At all.
I don't. I'm always outside.
Well, this has been fun. I've really enjoyed it. Dudley, have you got anything you want to add?
No, I had a blast. Learned a lot.
Yeah. William, we are real proud of the work you do over there. And we're
you.
big fans. If we can ever help you guys get a message out some kind of way, please consider us to be your right hand.
We will, and thank y'all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, enjoyed meeting your daughter. And look, you've got some... Your husband and your father traveled up here with. Thank you. Please tell hello to your mother.
I will.
So why don't you say goodbye, Dudley?
Goodbye, Dudley.
Get us out of here, Richie.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Gamekeeper Podcast, and be sure to tune in again. Subscribe to Gamekeeper Farming for Wildlife magazine, and don't miss the Mossy Oak Properties Fistful of Dirt podcast with my good buddy Ronnie Cuz Strickland.